Oh, hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the morning session that I had with APP Group. We are so excited to have our next session kicking off. That being said, we are going to give people a little bit of time to jump into the event. You will see on your screen that there is a poll question up. It'd be great if you could answer that poll question from us. If you are watching this in the lobby and you want to answer the question, you've got to join the event. So this event is live streaming through the platform as well. We appreciate all of the feedback we received from the first day of our Solution Summit, and we are extremely excited to not kick off because we already did that, but we're extremely excited to jump into our second session on day 2 with Satpal Kaur, principal and founder of Unbox. She is going to be talking to us about an integrative approach to high performance building design with climate justice. So welcome to our event. We're so pleased to have you on with us. I'm going to give you the floor and then I'm going to rejoin for a Q&A session. If you have specific questions throughout the event, please submit them either using the chat or the Q&A widget, and we'll do our best to get to them before the end of the session. So again, thank you for being on with us.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Satpal. I'm an architect and founder of Unboxed with over 20 years of experience crafting sustainable havens for vulnerable communities. I weld architecture as a brush for equity and change in construction and building materials. And often people ask me, what does my name mean? Well, it means one that abides by truth. So by default, I feel I have become my name, which is a name I always hated growing up. My journey designing high-performing buildings for vulnerable communities is an accidental one. I came to the US almost 20 years ago after graduating in London, and I worked for a star architect. I wasn't very satisfied and I lacked technical skills because I had never, quite frankly, built anything. So I quit my job and I ended up working with Chris Benedict, who was a pioneer in building science in buildings from theory to practice. And from there, I just became addicted and it just has shaped my career, my journey since then. And with that, let's begin this interactive approach to high performance building design with climate justice. I want to start by kind of just, when I think about designing for high performance buildings, like what is the main thing that comes in my mind? And I think is like kind of approaching it through a beginner's mindset. What is that beginner's mindset? The origins on the beginner's mind is from the 20th century Zen monk and teacher Shirinzu Suzuki, who designs it as in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert minds, there are few. As our own expertise builds, so do our biases, preconceptions, beliefs, etc. And the accumulation of these can be a tendency to narrow our own thinking. Today, I want to move that pendulum from the expert area that many of us in this room are striving towards in solving the big climate problem. And instead, I ask you to join me to a journey to a beginner's mind. A place, a place away from presumptions so you don't have to wear a black stuffy coat like this. A place away from organization thinking, where do you fit and where you don't fit in. This concept of the beginner's mind is not new for those who have come before us, and even us in this virtual space today. We're here because we want to learn. There's a sense of curiosity to ask questions, research, constantly evolving and pushing the envelope. What is architecture and does it need to be in a box in the built environment? And seeing amazing results is what we're actually always striving towards. Even in my own personal career, I've adopted the concept of building science, and the main principles of building science are shown here, where just similar to our bodies and our home, we're striving towards comfort. When it's cold outside, we're putting that heavy puffer jacket on to keep us warm. That's what the insulation does. And with the air tightness, most buildings are leaky despite them being new or old, and we can feel that draft. In fact, sometimes we can even hear the draft. And with windows, when they're super leaky, they're not comfortable spaces for us to sit in. And with thermal bridging, which is a concept that in the building science world, a good example would be a balcony, which extends out, and you having this moving from the inside to the outside. So there's not that insulation that's not keeping it warm. And just similar to our lungs, which we're using that oxygen to keep us alive virtually, the building needs to be able to have a series of supply and exhaust or energy recovery ventilator. And that's how you're sustaining that comfort. You're sustaining that body of the building, and you're trying to give it to not only comfort, you're also giving it very superior air quality and better public health also. So construction for me doesn't have to be like monopoly, where the aim is to accumulate wealth that gives players privilege and equity. Through the real estate lendings, rather than kind of going through the real estate lending where the opponents are going into bankruptcy or they're just becoming more richer, I take a different approach. And with the game of climatology, for me, real estate is more of a holistic lens, through a beginner's lens. And with that, we're trying to add value. So even in that grand global pandemic, which we have all, experienced collectively, we have seen in this experiment we can adjust to a new norm, and that new norm it be part of our new environment too. Whether even the impact of the carbon footprint, where it was 2.6 billions of carbon dioxide were not emitted to the atmosphere. Climate change obviously affects air, water, earth, and everyone around us, especially vulnerable communities. So this term always catches everyone. What does it mean when you're referring to vulnerable communities, and who are these vulnerable communities? And this is what I'm just going to quickly go through, and I'll be using New York City, where I reside, as my example here. So I'm going to roll that dice once more again, and we're going to land on politics, a place that plays a role that's a big role in the world of anything, but mostly in buildings too. So the way buildings are policies are designed, they're not necessarily equal. And we can see that from the redlining law that was actually put into effect many years ago, but just the impact of it, what it means today, how in New York, for example, like if you were in a red area, that was not seen as being very dangerous just because of, the Black people living there, and a green area was seen as being the best area just because there was no Black people living there. But even now, like New York is unique in the sense that it has transformed. These, these colors don't mean anything, but the impact of what it means of it after the effect has been much more in the sense of rezoning and be able to make housing much more equitable and more accessible for others as well. And you begin to see the impacts of this particular when you start doing the mapping exercise using the significant maritime and industrial areas. And you see most of the vulnerable housing where you have public New York public housing are associated around the periphery of New York. And this happens to be mostly environmental justice community areas, which are also low-income areas, communities of color, which is the South Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, which are also areas which are prone to hurricane and storm surges areas. This is also happens to be areas where people of color reside. And then as you can see, majority of the areas around the SMI areas represent 66% of the communities, which are people of color in the dark pink. And as with the land use map that shows industrial manufacturing uses are concentrated in the SMI areas, which over time has declined, but the impact of the pollution, et cetera, obviously still resides. So with the EPA making these changes, it's still something that impacts the communities that are based there. Poverty is below poverty line, even with the census tract with the dark red denotes areas where more than 66% of the community is below poverty level, which is still shocking because we're in New York. And even with and people who live around these areas, they just happen to be half a mile from these SMI areas also. Many low-income households live in or half a mile approximately away from the SMI areas. So the patterning is obviously showing this is really along the periphery. Data from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, we can see that even with the SMIs, the level of uninsured people happen to be also in these areas. And these are, oh, God forbid, in the event of a toxic exposure, they would be the most affected by this. And as sea level rises, which we're seeing in news every day, something regarding climate, these are the communities that will be impacted first because they are the ones closest to the area where you will have stored toxic waste in the neighborhood, and also where storm flood zones will be rising more quickly. And this kind of shows you like where the facilities are handling the hazardous substance or toxic chemicals would also threaten these communities if anything was to happen in these areas as well. So the impact of climate change connects to the financial energy burden, which a lot of people find it very difficult to understand until you start breaking down the numbers. And the stress for these communities who are just making this can be seen by evaluating the extremely low income families here, where, you know, say if you're on an area medium income of $32,000 and you're renting for $631. Once you kind of do your childcare and just everything else, what you're really left over is with $141, which is basically nothing. And even no state in the US can provide any family who's on an extremely low income a 2-bedroom house. It's just not possible. And this is a fact. So let's roll the dice again and let's land in Fairbluff, Avon. So right now I've been talking only about what it means for vulnerable communities. I want to switch that dice over. What does climate change mean if you're on the other spectrum, if you have the privilege, if you could change what it means for you in terms of making your environment better because you have the means? So Fairbluff and Avon is a great example. They both have been impacted by Hurricane Matthew in 2016 and Hurricane Florence in 2018. Fairbluff is a traditional coastal vulnerable community area, but it's inland. And, you know, most of the community have left. The government has offered the residents a lot of dollars for them to leave rather than future-proofing it. Investments are needed for economical growth and urban planning, but for people to stay. But residents have chosen to leave and it's become pretty much a ghost town. Avon, in contrast, is a privileged, affluent community town of vacation home facing the sea. It's what you would consider as being idyllic. It is a barrier town with one road connecting everyone. Avon is trying to reclaim their land from the sand that it has lost being due to the erosion with climate. The sand dunes have washed away faster as a result with sea level rising. No state or federal agency has asked the affluent community to leave, but instead they're asking for, they're looking for solutions to replace the beach that they've lost. And they have a 5-year plan, and it's a nourishment plan where they're going to find a place offshore that roughly matches the sand that they have lost, and they want to claim it back and they want to build that beach back. This plan will cost them $11 to $14 million. Avon's solution is to raise high taxes to get residents to pay for this, and Avon itself is buying about 5 years, some of the time, with the wealth that Fairbluff cannot. My main question when I look at something like this is like you're ultimately both going to be affected by climate, and you are being affected by climate. However, even with Fairbluff going out there and, you know, becoming this ghost town, Avon building this up, how much time are you really buying? Because, you know, you're both collectively going to be part of this change that's, you know, the time is not going to be able to really be able to buy you much time necessarily, even if it's 5 years. And I think for me, when I start looking at it much more holistically, I see climate, the solution for climate as much more one that involves many agencies, not just one, where you have architecture, you have planning, you have transportation, land use, etc. Everything has to be connected. You'd be able to speak about it and work in it with different communities and different groups coming together where you're getting much more of an impact. For example, where it's going back to public health, like where areas of insurance can be reviewed again, where you're trying to future-proof these buildings that would be hit by hurricanes or by flood zones, where we're building much more resilient way that they can sustain there and they don't have to be necessarily vacating their land. But the insurance policies, which has been in the news a lot, how do you kind of incorporate that back into much more of a holistic language into buildings as well? So for me personally, the equation for climate change is alongside with environmental justice, where I feel the people element cannot be taken away. You have to speak with it at the same time, because people are the core of climate. It is affecting everyone around, that we love and we care about. So let's roll that dice again, and we land in that free parking. So we can choose to, charge our electrical vehicles here, but instead, what I want us to do is think of it in a different way. How about when we're charging our electrical vehicles and we're looking at as being the stakeholders who have access to this, when we're looking at resources and how to build these resources, what do we influence in terms of decision making? And this innovation that we're all part of as a collective community, how do we start making accessible? And in my experience, and this is from my particular industry, when you're looking at it, like the communities that I'm working with is like my clients are the NGOs, not-for-profit citizens, investing, the developers. These are their goals, these are their design goals, and these happens to be their rating system that they might be looking at, net zero, high performance, etc. And these are all related, obviously, to costs, and there's a certain budget that they want to keep, etc. But majority of the time, what we don't speak about is that sizable population that's not on the table. And even I, as an architect, most of my decision making in the past has been looking at the aesthetics, and but there is a gap between the sizable population that I'm designing for and what does it mean in terms of using my power in order to be able to deliver something that I think will be able to be helpful for them through high performance that they may not even know that it's high performance because they're just simply happy it's their new building. And I think when I started questioning the position that I had as a architect who was doing super energy efficient buildings, I began to see my own biases of where I was coming from. I was seeing more that what was considered as being these glasses buildings were the buildings that were much more affluent, or stereotypes that I had from my own colonial upbringing of like what should be considered desirable, what is non-desirable, and even in terms of housing, like just being very quick and cheap. Does it have to be brick? Like, can we not change the status quo, what is seen as being affordable, or what needs to be within a certain budget? And how do we start to change the way that we think about it? So this is where I got lucky, where I took this chance dice as my opportunity and really started being more critical of my own particular work, and really start seeing in the lens of what was the desire of me getting to that truth that I was trying to get to, and who was I leaving behind and who was I not leaving behind? Could I be able to build this in a much more could I distribute the equity and the burdens in a much more way that they may not know the impact, but the value is going to be added later on as part of them inhabiting these spaces. And for that, I think is really essential. You have to become vulnerable, and it goes back to that beginner's mind. We have to be able to question things in ways that makes us uncomfortable, connects us in some way. And for me, this one of the projects that I worked with, this was the PIRE, was straight after pandemic. And we created a space that people could just collectively sit together. And, a space almost like a shapeshifter where you may not have the opportunity to say goodbye, or you just needed a space that was not in your own home, that people just we were collectively experiencing something, but also something that gave someone hope that they could have that shared experience. And I think very much climate is like that, is a shared experience. And with the at least kind of one of the iconic buildings that really changed policies and code that I've designed in New York City, which was the first affordable multifamily passive house building. 83 Knickerbocker is recognized by Mayor de Blasio as a 2050 carbon reduction and changed policies of code, what was considered being affordable construction that could be sustainable. So it's no longer being like, oh, we're going to be making things for the cheapest material and that's it. And also, one of the key things that I didn't want for this particular building is I wanted to change the perception of not for it to look like an affordable building. So we used a lot of modeling tools to figure out how to shade it, how to make it fully electrification system. And one thing was amazing is I think I didn't also see this coming too. The amount of publicity got and how, as a result, with taking a lot of site tours for people who were interested in seeing this building, the community who inhabited this building, they by default also became much more proud of the environment that they were in because we were giving them interest. And this is something that maybe as an outsider who, designs this building and normally just, we go back to check them, but this kind of interaction of the people who inhabit them, I never got to see until then. And just really just kind of this way that people felt, the impact on them. And in fact, I've gone back and questioned them, like, what do you really like about these buildings? And of course, my own ego as an architect is that I expect them to say, we love your amazing windows, but however, it's not that. It's what they really love is they have shelter on there. They have a shelter, which most of them didn't have because they lived in, they moved around from housing to housing. So, and they appreciate people coming to check their building out, and it makes them feel special and part of like an inclusive environment where people are really taking them seriously. One of the projects I've had the privilege to work on is a homeless shelter in New York, East New York, which is the size of a block. We worked with Enterprise Green Community, and this was on the right-hand side, what you see is the existing shelter itself. And there was 137 units that we had to replicate back in for the new building. So in this particular project, I got to really understand through the social workers and the shelter families that they were housing what was really needed. And this homeless shelter, they had never designed a homeless shelter that was going to be high performing. So this was a huge thing for Help USA. And one of my things that I have learned a lot working with the social workers itself too, where they have gone ahead and created this internal garden. And also just the way that the shelter itself was designed is series of interior corridors where social workers are not just connected on the first floor, but also, on other floors where you sense of interior corridors where you get to see residents coming in and out. And the hierarchy of people that are both professionally working there with people who are inhabiting there, they making a relationship and, someone they can go to. And also looking at the trauma-based informed design concept, that was very much part of like me understanding what that space needs to be for the communities that live there, and also for the social workers to be able to do their jobs much more effectively. The whole space, the shelter itself is the first U shape that you see over there, and the surrounding buildings were the supported buildings. So we provided the number of shelters that we had taken away, and they are the full shelter numbers are given back alongside with the additional spaces. And it is one of the first high-performing shelter buildings in the US.
I hate to jump on and interrupt you here. I just wanted to make sure, I actually just sent a message over the chat, so I just want to make sure you saw that message from me at the bottom. But keep going, and this is quite a comprehensive presentation so far. So we truly appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up in 2 minutes, so I'll love to take all of your guys.
No, you're good. Keep going. If you've seen my message, you'll know what's going on. So yeah. It's in the chat. Okay, thank you.
All right. So I've also, not every building needs to be obviously built. Like some buildings, existing buildings are fine. And this is just an example, and I'll try and speed up now. an existing Nightshade public house buildings where we did a study, and the initial thing was they wanted to demolish all the buildings, but the team that I was working with, we decided that was not the approach they need to do. They need to actually just retrofit these buildings. It happened to be in a flood zone. And instead of being, we were like, just start evaluating every building and retrofit it to high performing building standards. And that first floor becomes empty, and you'll be able to relocate the people and be able to build up trust where you're doing this work while they're in the space. So you're not necessarily taking away from their homes, etc. And you're working on the surface of the building, not in the internal parts of the building. And I can come back to this slide later on to show more technical aspects of how and why you do that approach. And I guess like not all designs have to be large things. Sometimes design can be transformative in a smaller scale. And that's where this window AC design that I had designed for a passive house as a prototype, just because the owners, we couldn't afford to really do heat pumps. It was more expensive. And this is a few years ago before heat pumps became a thing that people were, you can actually buy from the market. So instead, what we ended up doing was a window AC prototype that combined a high performing window with the AC combined, that you could meet ADA, that would allow you to have fresh air, meet building codes. And it was great because it meant people will be comfortable. You're not being super hot as, when it's really hot outside. And, the whole thing complying to energy standards in general meant that the owner was so happy with it that they implemented it for other buildings. With this, I'll just, one of the things that I've kind of gone with my own experiences now is designing with Unbox, is like taking that whole experience of designing high performance building, but using it in a much more way where I'm also interested in the materials, where with Unbox, what we're doing is using recycled polymers to 3D print prefabricated building blocks like Legos that are designed to passive house standards. We're trying to use it in a way that the value that we're trying to do is make it accessible, efficient, scalable, and obviously provide shelter and dignity. Make it scalable so it can be stackable. So, taking that built design experience that I've had designing all these buildings and be able to prove that, you don't have to pay a lot. This flexible kit of parts can be working across the board by construction cost and time being reduced by 50%. Is fully electrification. A provisional license has been filed for this. And in terms of just numbers, what we have seen with the demonstration project, we reduced the cost quite significantly of this, where it's from $155 a square foot to the $455 that you would normally get in New York. And it complies with tax credits that allows the owner to save $5,000 per tax credit. And I think just generally moving ahead. So, when I think about, so who are we solving the climate for? There's a lot of questions that comes in my mind. How do we identify systems of power that shape political and racial separation in design when we're trying to have a beginner's mind? And that normally, even for me, means that I'm going back and questioning my intent. Do I still have the same values that I was, that I started with? Can this design approach to look at it in a more holistic lens? Do I need to be working with policies that I may not have thought about? And really just, sometimes getting outside constructive criticism or speaking to people on the ground, which is something part of the process in my job anyway. And with that, I'll just leave you with the questions that I always ask myself. What is the outcome and what is the process? And with that, thank you. So we're back, Jessica.